Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of the 4 at 4. Your panel for the show is comprised of 4 published authors. We have Melody Brooke with melodybrook.com, a marriage and family counselor, corporate consultant, actress, producer, and advocate. Monica Shimonik with momsunshackled.com, licensed certified health coach, lobbyist, activist, and advocate. Sherry Palmer with Fixed Family Courts, a constitutional scholar, co-founder of the National Family Law Policy Center, and activist and advocate. And Catherine McWillie is the founder of CustodyCalculations.com, a retired LAPD officer, parental alienation, CPS conflict expert, and advocate. And I'm Lorelai, your host. Sherry, what are we talking about today?
Well, hi, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about Lisa Ling's new episode called The Dad Dilemma that she aired last night, 10 p.m. CNN, on fathers who are fighting for custody or equal custody of their children and dads that are experiencing parental alienation. So I was going to go ahead and let Catherine start, but I think I'm going to go over to Melody, as I know, Catherine, you just reviewed some of it, so we'll give you a few more minutes. But Melody, I wanted to get your take on this because it was focused on dads. It opened with the moms, but it was very, focused on fathers and the plight that fathers are experiencing. And one thing was mentioned in the show that I was really happy she did was the emotions that the dads experienced when they were going through this as they were separated from their children. And was mentioned normally in the show, we were kind of trained as a culture to believe that dads were deadbeats and didn't want to be a part of their children's lives, right? So what did you think about how the show represented dads?
Well, I think it did a pretty good job showing the amount of pain that my clients certainly have when they go through that experience. And I've had multiple dads who have been completely shut out and then alienated from their children over decades, to the point that they felt suicidal or the kids felt suicidal, and it was devastating to the family. And I can't see how anybody thinks that the way our family court system is set up right now is going to engender any kind of health in not only the dads but the children. I had just posted something this morning about 26 of the 27 of the last mass shooters were children of divorce, and they didn't have a father role in their life at all.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's something that we have to, as a culture, recognize and begin to change, or we're just going to see more of this.
Yeah. Yeah. So what about the brotherhood? Oh, I can't hear her.
I'm losing you. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, the brotherhood.
Yeah, the fact that they formed a brotherhood and a support system, isn't that kind of new for dads to talk about this?
Oh, very much so. And they get there's an awful lot of backlash around that, as though somehow it was wrong for them to step up and be dads, which is what we've been trying to get men to do for a long time. So
right.
I don't get it. It's like women both want dads to be a part of their kids' life and don't want to lose that role of power in the family either, right? So yeah. It's really going to be women that have to make the biggest shift in understanding that both parents play an enormous role in their child's development, and even if they don't agree with the way their ex is treating their children, they still to support that role in their
Yeah, and I think because they're talking about it more, do you think that's going to drop the suicide, the number of suicides that are
the more they get support from each other? Yes, because part of what happens, a person gets suicidal when they feel trapped, like there is no way out, and their brain sort of goes, okay, here's a way out.
well crap, I think we all felt that way the whole time going through this. I don't know if that part's going to go away.
I think because the system is so slanted against fathers, that I think that's, I mean, obviously if you're a mom and you're going through that same kind of alienation, you're going to have that same experience as I know you did, Sherry. So, I mean, it makes perfect sense to me that when you feel trapped like that, that it's like your brain just says, okay, here's a way out. Although it's not an accurate way out, it is a way out, or at least it seems so in the moment. But having that ability to connect with other people who are going through the same experience gives you some hope that you have the support in a community that will allow you to, at least if nothing else, be heard, validated, empathized with, and allowed to express the pain that you're in and move on.
Yeah. And Monica, you're going through it right now. You only get 4 days, right?
Yep. I walked into family court the very first day. That was in January of 2010. And I walked in as a full and equal parent, and I walked out maybe 4 hours later as a visitor parent, and I've been a visitor parent ever since. My son has quadrupled in age since this happened. He's 12 now, and my son doesn't even remember a time in his life where I was actually around every day. And I never had equal custody, or I did until the day we went into court, but I'd never ever had an order that permitted equal custody. And the show last night was triggering for me because I could relate to what these dads were going through. And this is a 40 plus year catastrophe in our culture. I grew up in the 80s, and it was normal to have a father around every other weekend. And so people who grew up in with that toxic dynamic are now having children. And so, it's now a newer generation is being born with this upbringing, and their parents had it. So I was torn from my father when I was 4. My son was torn from me. And so theoretically, I have 3 children. Theoretically, one of them could be in my situation, and the same thing my father went through, et cetera. So this has been trickling down through the generations, and it's a public health crisis. And this is a very expensive problem because fatherless children and motherless children are not very productive as productive in society as kids who grew up with both parents. And this is a menace to public health. It's draining for taxpayers because special education budgets have to explode every year to keep up with all these kids growing up in these without one of their parents. And this is going to bankrupt our entire country, in my opinion.
Yeah. And Catherine, you see children going through this a lot because you've worked with parental alienation. I don't know how closely you actually work with children. Have you had any experience with how the children feel about, what's happened, whether adults or younger? I don't know if she can hear me.
Well, I can say that, I also was a child of divorce. I'm separated from my father at the age of 2.5. And, knowing what I know now, I know that was probably a really good thing. So sometimes it can be a good thing. But for the most part, I think the whole attitude about that moms always, or even just the idea that both parents should not be a part of a child's life, to do that is long-term damaging, not just for the parent, certainly, but for the child.
Yeah, and Carlos mentioned that his marriage broke down because of an infidelity. He cheated, for lack of better words, on his wife. You can still see the pain and hear the pain from him in that. It's like it's a mistake that he can never live down. And it's like the family courts keep punishing him over and over and over again. How he says that's affected his children. How do you get through to people like that? Like how do you tell them to keep punishing someone like that, or what do you do?
Well, I'm not of the belief that punishment is a valid form of treatment of anyone. So no, punishment.
Well, but the family courts, I mean, that's the whole thing about it, right? I mean, they're punishing somebody, so they want to look to blame. Now, some people will say, well, it's no fault, divorce, but
when
yeah.
you compare fidelity, it does set things up in the favor of the person who's been cheated on.
Right. But he has gone, he has suffered loss of his medical practice. He has gone to jail multiple times, one time for 6 months. He's completely been devastated. And there's no there's no controls. There's no checks and balances in the family courts. And so there's no way for him to really stop what they're doing to him. He did get his child support lowered recently, but this is kind of what you see when a system or a process runs away with no checks and balances and no rights protections put in place.
Well, not only are there no rights, the fact is that parents aren't even allowed to advocate on their own behalf. They're not allowed to. The ACLU refuses to participate in supporting parents fighting the system.
And Adam Dingle comment, he asked who usually invited the system in.
Well, that's a problem. I mean, the courts act like inviting them is asking them to ignore your rights, but in actuality, that's the only way to get your rights protected. So unfortunately, as long as we require our rights to be litigated, you have to go to a king in a black robe, a king or a queen. But I agree with Adam that, if he's saying that we shouldn't have to do it this way, I agree. But I don't think it should matter whether it's the mom or the dad that goes to the court. I think what should matter is that the court is supposed to serve as a fortress, as protection to your rights. So if somebody comes in and they file for something they have a right to do, like divorce, then they should also be balancing and protecting you from those attacks on yours and your children's right.
And yet the court itself is set up to destroy those rights, because it doesn't even you talk to a divorce attorney and they say constitutional law doesn't apply. Well, what what
does apply then, right?
Right.
What does apply?
So this might be a good time for me to jump in, which is the fact that, for 36 years I've been dealing with family law and certainly have my experience in all the different types of courts. And really what we're talking about is a system that was well-intentioned and now fails everyone: mothers, fathers, children. Even the system itself is imploding upon itself under the current process that we need to act in the best interest of the children. And yet, in my experience, best interest of the children has done more harm unintentionally than ever could have been done intentionally.
Thank you.
So would you agree when Adam says that we need to stop bringing our life to court and need our families to take over?
Well, the problem is that you don't have an option. Unless you have an amicable divorce with an out-of-court settlement, you still require a legal document, which the attorneys can provide. So court is really there as an arbitrator, to make decisions when the parents can't agree. So
But the problem is that's not serving as that, and it's very dangerous and risky for these parents to go to court for that purpose, and for them to believe that that's what the purpose they're serving is, injuring their children and injuring them.
That's not, as I said, that's not the intention of the courts. But you have a legal contract. Marriage is a legal contract. People marry for purposes of emotions. But when that contract ends, the parties decide to divorce, you have to have a legal recognition of that process. So if it's not the court, it has to be something else. And again, parents, if the few lucky ones, and I do mean few, are able to do that, that's great. But
I would say that's where I think that where Adam's going with this, and I agree with him, is First Amendment is that these people have to figure these things out on their own. The court has no business in it. They have First Amendment rights to disagree and to have these disputes. Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with that, Sherry. What I'm saying is that we have to have some sort of system. And if people could work everything out, they'd likely still be married, and there'd be no reason for a police department to respond to all these radio calls. Because we're
Right.
talking about a system right now that literally drives people to the point where they commit murder, where they murder their children, they murder each other, they do shootings, mass shootings, as Melody identified. So what we need to really recognize is, and that's what my 10 years of research did, is if court systems could operate more functionally and better, and recognition of the constitutional rights, if we simply, and I get really strong about this, if we simply enforce the court orders to begin with, in addition to recognizing shared parenting. And
Well, I say that most of the things that have worked out in people's best interest in our country have to do with things that we've allowed people to be educated about, and once they're educated about it, different choices. And so from my standpoint, I see that most women and men, especially the men, come into a divorce and think, well, I'm going to get every other weekend. That's just how it is. And they don't realize that there's another option. I think it's starting to come to the forefront now that more parents, more dads are becoming aware of the equal parenting.
Right.
option.
And now the courts, right. But now,
But we've got to educate women and men that
Yeah.
this is in the best interest of their children, absolutely. And it's
right.
not that the court should not be interfering with their choice about how they want to raise their children.
well,
And
that's sort of a different topic. How parents choose to raise their children is different from the percentages of time that they are given by the courts. And I hate using that word, given by the courts, but that's our current system.
But once parents start recognizing that equal parenting, once they're it's just like educating people about spanking their children. Once they're educated about it and they realize that there's other options, they choose other options. It's
well,
like,
I'm all in support.
about that, they stop smoking. It's about educating people.
I'm sorry, we're over talking because we're all so passionate about this. The thing is that I truly believe in the education. I truly believe in the importance of parents having tools long before they get to the courtroom. And Monica, I'm so sorry for what happened in your case, but what we're seeing and what I get a little concerned about is this impression that this is not a gender issue. We're seeing a growing number of mothers losing custody, and court has become all about the last one standing with an attorney. So it's all about money. It's also about who looks the best, sounds the best, and is the most convincing. And frankly, perjury is rampant in our courts. And that's what's leading to so many of these bad decisions. And I work with as many fathers as I do mothers, and as many mothers as fathers. So I don't take a position other than to support the law, and I support parents both having equal access to their children. And I don't hold back. If my client is feeling the need, frustration, or some other issues, safety is always brought up. I walk my clients through that process, and we take the appropriate action.
Right, and that's really important. Monica, your situation really relates to this of what happened to you personally. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the person who wrote, I think his name is Adam. He said, well, I think he said you invite the government into your lives by going to court. People don't understand. I've had someone about 3 weeks ago criticize me. She left about 45 comments on my, well, maybe 20 comments on my live stream that I invited this into my life by going to court. And I had to tell her, we don't have a choice. If we get served by the other parent, we have to show up. If we don't show up, we're going to lose by default judgment. So because somebody served me for custody and sued me for custody, and I showed up, that's not me automatically giving my rights away to the state. And oftentimes, again, and the other option, if people keep saying, stop going to court, okay, fine. Then I'm going to stay in my bad marriage then. So like people are now choosing, like, do I stay in this horrible marriage or do I go to court? I'm at the point now where I'm encouraging people not to get divorced at all costs, because I say, a family court, whatever, is better than a bad marriage, or excuse me, worse than a bad marriage.
Well, as
Unless-
long as their lives aren't in danger.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
I mean, there are people who are
Yeah,
staying in dangerous
Monica, I think you summed that up just perfectly by saying I didn't have a choice. When I'm served, I'll lose custody entirely if I don't show up for court, if I don't protect my rights. I couldn't agree more with you. You know,
And-
it's not a choice.
And Adam did later state we need to understand what our rights are and what the law is. Our state constitution isn't being taught for that reason. And Jerome also wrote in and said, "What happens when your ex doesn't tell you where your daughters go to school? Where your girls go to gymnastics?" And say, "Not your day, sorry." And just a few examples that he
that's
has.
horrible. Yeah, unfortunately, the courts empower people to do that, and they actually reward them when they do that. You may hear them say sometimes, "Oh, you shouldn't do that," but then they leave the full control in their hands. So unfortunately, our system is set up to choose one parent over the other. They empower that parent. That parent's then favored. The other parent really doesn't have any ability to exercise their authority outside of their physical time that they have with their child. But if it comes down to a dispute, once they're made non-custodial, what they have to say generally isn't going to matter.
Yeah, my judge told me that by me simply attempting to co-parent with my ex, I'm bothering him, and I should just leave him alone and understand that he doesn't want to co-parent with me. Like, I'm supposed to respect that he doesn't want to co-parent with me. And
That's
and then
another
I would
thing they force on people like you, Monica. They force that on you. They know it's a no-win situation for you. And again, then they use that against you, when actually co-parenting is not required under the Constitution. It is your right to disagree, just like it was your right to no longer be with that person. And
So we should
we're-
probably, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying the courts are punishing people. They disfavor divorced people. I think divorced people or separated parents are more disfavored than the gay rights movement now. So unfortunately, we're going to have to keep learning our rights, teaching them, and standing up for other parents who are going through this now. And I'm glad all you ladies are here. I think we're all, all of you are super dynamic. And I think Lisa Ling summed it up at the end of her show, where she said, "How can this possibly be in the best interest of these children?"
It's not.
Definitely. It's not. I would agree. And maybe the next show should be on parallel parenting, Monica, because we have lots of parents now who are losing custody, mothers and fathers, because they can't co-parent. And yet, as the one judge said to you, he's not even aware that there's another option. Not even aware there's another option called parallel parenting, which would have given you information.
Some of the statutes, Catherine, actually require co-parenting. So I was just looking at some of them on the East Coast. They require co-parenting. We've got to take that out of there. I understand, like you said, some things may be very well-meaning, but now that we know that they're actually creating more harm for the child in certain situations, they need to stop trying to play super parent. Right? People are going to work through certain things. So, and the ones who don't, those will be the ones that the court needs to.
Yeah,
Even if something is well-meaning, I can only imagine how the children perceive things when a parent like Monica is told just to stop trying to co-parent. Like, how do you think that affects that child?
Yeah, actually, I'm a big fan of parallel parenting. I think that's the best option in my situation. And parents, a lot of parents parent better when they're not triggered by their former spouse. And me and my former partner parent better when we're not associating with each other. We go to school meetings together, but we don't look at each other. We don't talk to each other. We don't have anything to do with each other. And as a result, there is no conflict because we're not being forced to get along. And the government doesn't have jurisdiction to oversee a private relationship and regulate a private relationship between two adults of sound mind. And that's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's a great point, Monica, because I agree with you. I think that by forcing the two parents who don't agree to interact with each other creates more stress and conflict and anxiety and more illness. In fact, a lot of parents have other exes who have narcissistic type behaviors, right? And it's super stressful for them to have to interact with them again. But if you can manage it where you're each able to parent your child and not spark each other, not interact, I mean, that parent could be totally wonderful with other adults, but just not with you. Leave that alone, like you said, and let's see if the parenting works. And by the way, that is the default position in the Constitution, is you are supposed to default first to equal parenting. Whether or not they're in agreement, let them figure out if it works or doesn't work. It's not up to the court whether or not they like it. It's whether or not is it working before they can come in and start restricting you more in a parenting plan that puts restrictions on your time and authority. So.
I don't know if there's time to talk about the other issues, which was child support, which was a big point in the show, but I think we're at the end of the show, aren't we?
We do have five minutes.
Okay, so I read a lot of the comments by all the various persons that were sought out. And, you know, some of them were sort of like the words man up, you can catch up, you know, make notification to the courts. And for some people, they're just so broken by that point. You know, they're doing the best they can. Some, of course, are intentional actions. You know, one example given is like a CEO of a corporation that quits his job and says he won't work at McDonald's or is laid off from a job. You know, there are some extreme examples where I know a lot of people.
That was the judge that said that, wasn't it, Catherine? The judge that Lisa Ling put on her CNN blog page.
Well, because I scanned the comments so quickly, I didn't catch who said what. But, you know, every parent I've never spoken to has always said, I want to pay my child support. I've just been laid off and I need some breathing room. But the one example of someone who said he owed $680,000 in back child support.
That's Carlos Rivera.
Yeah. How are you going to catch up with that? And it really goes back to the basics, which is we currently take the ability of one parent to provide, well, for both parents to provide the children and give it all to the other parent. So it's how are we making it fair for both parents?
We're creating welfare for this other parent. There's one dad that I've worked with, and he basically said once the mom got money, and it's not always the mom who gets child support now, but the majority of the time, she quit her well-paying job. So it becomes a welfare type of system for these other parents, and the courts will argue, well, they're staying home and they're raising the child, but you know what? You don't get that benefit anymore once you're no longer in the marriage. And, you know, I'm sure there's lots of other arguments.
In Utah, that absolutely is what happens, because there is a completely terrible child support laws there to where even if no matter what the dad is making, he has to pay a certain amount of money, and that's that. And the parent that has kids, they can not work, and that's fine.
Well, we're seeing a growing number of parents, both mothers and fathers, paying child support. So again, while the emphasis of the show was on fathers, I want to keep coming back and saying it's not fair to either parent, mothers or fathers. We're not doing a good job and just rewarding one group over the other. And just a reminder, historically, women have been the ones who were thought of property, and the children were thought of property. And it's really only in recent times, you know, the last 30 or 40 years, that women have been able to obtain custody. And I'm not saying now that that's fair against fathers, but historically, women have fought for the rights to get where they are today, to have custody of their children. And we need to do a better job for both parents.
I have to say that I have had some clients who were able to negotiate and manage a 50-50 split where each parent paid a fair percentage of their income as child support, and they shared time with the children, and it all worked out on balance. But
why did each one pay?
Because if one parent is making a lot more money than the other parent, they each pay a percentage of what's rightfully their percentage to support the child, which means one parent's going to end up getting a little bit more money to help raise the standard of living for the child to be up to where they should be. Does that make sense?
Well, okay, so they weren't both paying in one family household then. It was one person.
Right. There's
Okay.
split, but each pays child support. One gets more than the other.
Okay. Okay. I get it. So no, I mean, when you ask me if it makes sense, I don't think that it makes sense at all to violate the Constitution, impose a financial burden on parents who have not been proven to have refused to care for their child directly. So any state that is imposing this on somebody who has the ability to provide the basic needs for their child is committing an unconstitutional order. So no, I don't
Yeah,
believe that it
providing
makes
the
sense at
cost.
all. Yeah.
Well,
Providing
Carlos, I'll just close with this. Carlos, if he was still married, would he be forced to pay $680,000 towards his children if he was still married? Would the government be going after him to check to make sure he put that much money towards the care of his children? They wouldn't.
Right.
You know, the government doesn't force me to spend certain amounts of money on my daughter, but they make me pay money for my son.
Unequal protection. You're making an unequal protection argument.
Yeah,
Yep.
and Adam said taking away your driver's license is likely to increase the likelihood of incarceration. And John says, who determines how much money a child actually needs?
Well, first of all, I don't think that they should be doing that at all, John, because if you are caring for your child directly, willing to do that, have not been proven properly in a court of law to have failed to support your child directly through your care, they shouldn't be making those determinations. But if the state wants to set a minimum standard, then it shouldn't be more than what the state collects for a child once they have legitimately taken over the custody of a child and placed them in foster care. I know that's a whole other bag of worms. We're not going to talk about foster care right now, but if they say that they need $700 a month to raise that child, I don't think that they should ever be allowed to charge any parent more than what they have to get to raise the child themselves. More than they pay, sorry, to raise that child themselves.
That makes sense.
And we really appreciate all of your comments and your input, but we do have to stop there. So thank you so much, and thank you to all the ladies who come in and talk to us every week. Tune in next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
I need